those of you that don't know me and maybe weren't here at the last one, my name is Jeffrey Dale. My pronouns are they and he, and I am the Minister of Faith Formation, Youth, and Young Adults for what's called Shining Waters Regional Council. And Shining Waters Regional Council, for those that sort of don't know what that is, it's an area that is in Toronto and up into what's called the Muskoka region. And so tonight we're into our second of our three-part conversation. And tonight the focus will be on both some lived experience with our special guest, Amber Nicole Jensen, who's the founder of Sweetgrass Youth Alliance. And we'll also be talking about decriminalization of illicit substances for personal use. And we're going to do a short video of naloxone training together. Just some Zoom stuff. If you're just joining us, we invite you to mute yourself. You can have your camera on if you want or not. That's perfectly fine. One of the easiest ways during the question time is if you have a question to use the raise your hand function, which you can find in your toolbar. You'll find participants, and at the bottom of your participants list will be the option to raise your hand. And so there's that piece. But again, if there's silence and you yell out your question and unmute yourself, we're not going to ignore your question. So don't worry if you can't find the raise your hand function. I always take a long time to find it too. There will be a lot of information shared tonight, as there was last week. What I'm doing out of these three sessions is I'm compiling a document, which will make sure it gets out to everyone in the group with all that information for further consideration and conversation. So I just want to make sure that you know of that. In our time of worship tonight, there will be the song that's playing, just so people know, there will be explicit language utilized in that song. So if that's something that you're not comfortable with, you can mute the song yourself, or maybe if you have young people in the room and you don't want them to hear that explicit language, we just want to make you aware that that will be in there. And I will, again, at the start of the worship, make you aware of that. So as we gather tonight, we consider the traditional territories on which we gather. And here in Toronto, I'm on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Nishnabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat people. Toronto is also home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. And you may be on different traditional territory, and there's a website called native-land.ca, which I invite you to go to if you don't know what traditional territory you are on. On that website, you can find out the territory, you can find out the languages that have been spoken there for tens of thousands of years, and the treaties that are there. And we are a treaty people, and the land that I'm on is covered under Treaty 13, which was signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, which were signed with the Mississaugas and Chippewa bands, multiple bands of them. So that's an opportunity for us to consider. And part of the reason why I feel the territorial acknowledgement is especially important in this conversation as well is because Indigenous people across Canada are disproportionately affected by the toxic drug crisis that we are facing, and they are disproportionately affected by the criminalization of illicit substances. In fact, they represent a higher percentage of people who are criminalized due to illicit substances than there is in the population of Indigenous people in Canada. So it's important for us to recognize those pieces. In a little bit, you'll hear from Amber Nicole Jensen, and she's on, which is great. So I just want to say welcome and thank you, Amber, for being with us tonight. So we open this time in worship together, and we open with a prayer. And if you have a candle around you, you can light one. I don't have mine right here, so I will use this as sort of my candle, the one that's behind me. But let us pray at this time. God of the cosmos, you who understand infinite space and yet also understands our deepest inner desires, gather with us as we remember, recognize, and respect the lives lost due to toxic drugs in Canada and throughout the world. We gather remembering that each life lost is not because of their own failures in life, but rather because of our systematic and systemic failures as a society. We recognize that through harm reduction and communal support, we can build a more just world. We respect the stories that are shared and the emotions that are felt. In you, O God of wonder and awe, we are interconnected. In you, O God, we are more than mere individuals. We are a community founded in a deep passion and commitment to one another. Amen. And before we move into the song, I just want to check with Brianne that we are recording. Brianne, we are recording, correct?
Yes, we are.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so this is the song that I was talking about before. There is explicit language in the song. This song was written by hip hop artist El Rev. And one of the reasons why we're utilizing the song, and we received permission from El Rev to utilize his song tonight, is because the lyrics to it is published in the book, I Am the Opioid Crisis, which is the book that Amber was one of the editors on. And so we share this now, and I give you that, not warning, but that awareness of the language that is utilized in the song.
Counterfeit pain pills laced with a drug 50 times more powerful than heroin were found inside his home.
Fentanyl. It is extremely powerful. Just a little bit of it can kill you. Tonight, we're learning that the music legend may have accidentally taken it and died.
Yeah, are you alright? What happened that made you not want to smile? I mean, everybody's got problems, but how does it affect you? Cause when people are falling down, there's a power that makes them get off the ground. Whether the power is God yourself or the people that's around, you need to recognize and keep on reaching for the clouds. These beans will beat you down, OD sleeping on the couch, but you people don't believe it till you see it for yourself. What do I gotta do to make it apparent to you? I'm only doing what I wish anybody would do. Try and look at this from a different point of view. I've been given a second chance, now's the time, gotta choose. What am I here for? What do I spit for? Will I be judged for all the stupid things I did? Or will my music be relating to the kids more, so that they can finally find something to live for? Dog is 365, the reason that I'm alive is the fight for my friends that have died. This ain't happening elsewhere, it's happening right outside. Y'all really need to open up your eyes. These pills are killing brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, daughters and sons. A whole lot more often than guns. You start to blame yourself when people are dying so young, thinking damn, something should have been done, huh? Cause ain't nobody giving a damn about nobody else. We need to look inside ourselves and try to help. We might as well, cause in the end, when you're beside yourself, you need to find the light inside and try to motivate your people to be inspired as well. Despite this helpless feeling of uncontrollable anger, how the hell could you not know the danger? I wish that you were just a stranger, but I knew you were used to hanging. Now I'm writing to all of these fallen angels. We wanted what was best for you, even though plenty of folks attested to when they would see you on the streets, there wasn't a whole lot left of you, because they think all fentanyl had got the best of you and messed with you, made people start to think less of you, disrespected you, called your names behind your back, neglected you. See what the problem was? They ain't even bothered to come and check with you. You could have been dead, but they didn't care, so now they're dead. You ain't got nobody left, so now what's left to do? You gotta get up, get out, and smell the roses. I'll be an outcast till I'm dead, so let me tell my story. I'll include the mishaps, the slip-ups, and get backs, the hiccups and letdowns, mistakes that made me better for it. Stay hella focused, keep your mind clean, your nose too. Get back to the people that love you and know you. Stay hopeful, cause everything that you go through will mold you, control you. Don't trip, it's supposed to. You ain't got the answer, sway. I could call myself a man today, even though I've been a basket case. I keep moving like I'm Cassius Clay, and looking back I might have my way. Hey yo, the past won't change, why bother trying? This vision's on my mind, but it's ahead of me and not behind. Cause if I dwell, it's hell, so oh well, I'm swell. I ain't trying to tell you nothing now. Hey yo, don't come around with all your speculations. I don't do this for a reputation. I'm here to tell the nation about this epidemic that we facing. It started in a lab and made its way into our generation. The government introduces to Oxycontin. The hope of stopping ain't an option. The withdrawals got you nauseous, got a sore back. Well, here's a pill to fix the problem. 80 milligrams of death. Then after they filled some coffins, they took it up off the market. Remade it not to be altered. Not thinking about the addicts that could knock. Go see see a doctor. Roaming the streets not to be bothered. Unless you got that product to offer, then they talk to you longer. Yo, the rise of opiates made the products get harder. We seen the profit off of death, cause he's wanted it stronger. Big Pharma responded with saying Oxy wasn't causing the problem that y'all motherfuckers started. We've all seen the casualties, from losing an acquaintance to immediate family. All we seem to see is tragedy. We need to see reality from a different perspective. No kid is defenseless when we are all willing to end this. Poison that someone conceals as a medicine and gives to the parents of a kid who doesn't know the difference and gets into your pill cupboard, tries one and gives 10 to his friends, and then 3 of those friends end up fucking dead from it. I don't wanna say rest in peace in another song. Seems like every song I write there's another gone. And I ain't from a place where people get shot every day. I sold dope, but I ain't never said I got what it takes to have a Glock on my waist, pop it off in your face. But I'm nodded off in the days, didn't know the Oxy was fake. I don't know if I could change it, but I'd be damned if I don't try. I survive, so I'ma hold my head high.
Alberta's Health Minister Sarah Hoffman says the bad Alberta economy means there is just no more money for drug treatment beds to help combat the deadly fentanyl crisis gripping Alberta. The deadly opioid street drug has poured into Alberta over the last 5 years in both its pure form or as an additive in other street drugs. It's in the same family as morphine, but it is 50 to 100 times more toxic.
Illegal fentanyl, made to look like other milder painkillers and then sold on the street, has become a growing problem nationwide.
Unless it's been prescribed to you, because you don't know where you're getting, and if it's on the street, you never know. It's that one pill that can kill you, can cost your life.
And we thank El Rev for that powerful song. At this time, I invite you to write in the chat about our moment of consideration. So for those of you that were here last week, as you listened last week about how people are engaging across the country in harm reduction work, and you consider this week people's own struggles with substance use, what do you see as the church's call to harm reduction work in the world? And if you weren't here last week, you can share what you believe is the church's call to harm reduction in the world around us. I invite you to put that in the chat. Do our best with an open mind to help and listen and not judge. Thank you, Linda. Yes. Educate, being open to those struggling. Yes, Tracy. Jim, legalization and safe injection. Yes, sites. And we'll talk a little bit about that and the differences there of wording. Compassion, collaborate, educate, not to judge, to understand. Well, as we enter into our next prayer, please do keep writing those comments, and I see them coming in, because it's important for us to know as a church where we can move forward in our call to action and what that action looks like. And that action comes from each of us in community and in conversation. And so please do not be afraid to share in the chat. Our prayer for our closing time of worship is this. Let's pray. God, make me an instrument of understanding. Where there is stigma, let me bring knowledge. Where there is misdiagnosis, let me bring clarity. Where there is despair, let me be filled with light. Where there is anger, sow me the words of love. Where there is an action, let me be the first to stand up. O Creator, grant that I may not so much be the person to think I have all the answers, but be the person that walks with others on the journey of learning. May my heart and mind be open to that, be so open that I am able to understand what needs to be. May my soul and being be a presence in a time of great need. And may I remind myself that through love and community, we can build a stronger existence. Amen. It is at this time that I would like to invite Amber Jensen as one of our guest speakers. Amber, I'm going to let you share a little bit about your bio, but I will make sure that in the chat is the access to the book where people can access it. But thank you, Amber, for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Amber Jensen. I live in Southern Alberta, so it's a little small town outside of Lethbridge. I'm coming to you from Treaty 7 territory. We live on Kainai territory, and we're kind of in a unique situation here in Southern Alberta because we have the largest Indigenous reservation, which is the Blood Tribe. So we have a really unique sort of compilation of people. We also are close to the Trans-Canada, so we get people coming from across Canada, lots of people coming from BC, but more going to BC, I think. A little bit about me. I'm a single mom of 2 children that are biologically mine. I also have a foster son right now. I have had 11 foster children. And what kind of turned me onto this path here is when I lost one of my foster children. His name was Brett, and he was very severely FASD. The system didn't do a lot to protect him when he turned 18. In fact, they wouldn't allow him to live with me any longer. They basically pushed him out onto the street where he ended up at the homeless shelter. And he sadly passed away from drug poisoning on the floor of the homeless shelter. And so that was very sad, and it got me very mad, and I wanted to do something about it. So I started Sweetgrass Youth Alliance, which is an organization that aims to provide services to help youth to adult transition. So we help fill in the gaps that the systems have for youth, any youth that are transitioning from youth to adulthood. And we do focus on a lot of addiction issues because that's a very prevalent problem in our community right now. And sadly, since I wrote the book, I lost another foster daughter to drug poisoning. This is Brianna. So that's just 2 of the very many family and friends and people that I know that have passed away from drug poisoning. Did you want me to talk a little bit about the book now, or?
Sure, yeah, it would be great.
Okay, so the book was an idea. We actually started with a focus group, so people with lived experience, people that use drugs. And we found that with the focus group, what they were really getting the most out of was hearing other people's stories. So they would hear another person's story about themselves or a family member or a friend, and they could really relate and they felt less alone. So what I thought was, why don't we get all these stories together in a book, and so that people can read these stories. And one of the main reasons was to decrease stigma towards people that use drugs. There's a lot of stigma in our community. So what we did was we gathered up a lot of the people that were in the focus group, and then they led us to other people, and we got a collection of stories. We partnered with Jason Eaglespeaker, who's a famous author and illustrator, and he created illustrations for some of the stories, not all of them. And we did that so that people, even if they have low literacy, could still sort of follow along with the stories and still get something out of the book, even though they may not be able to read if they have low literacy. The book's done very well. All the proceeds go back to the Sweetgrass Youth Alliance. And I'm happy to say everybody that was in the book is still alive and doing well. I was contacted by the media about the book a few times. One of them, they really wanted to focus on the fact that I had a drug dealer in the book, and they thought that that was wrong and I was glorifying. There was inhalation booths, I should say. And I'm not talking about inhalants like huffing, but smoking, usually meth or crack. So it sadly closed due to various reasons, some funding issues and that kind of thing. But even since then, there's one in Edmonton that closed, and Jason Kenney is our premier right now. I don't know if anyone else to us. So we definitely have a relationship with a lot of people that are on the streets, and we have to have that relationship before they'll trust us. Excuse me. Before they will be able to ask for help when they're ready. They can't just have a social worker come up to them and say, you know, why don't you go to treatment? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? A lot of them have trauma associated with people in authority. So a lot of the Indigenous people in our community, either themselves or their parents grew up in residential schools. So we're seeing a lot of the trauma being passed down through generations, and they find it hard to trust people, especially white people, and especially people of authority. It's really important for us to have, so all of my employees are people with lived experience, and they're all Indigenous. So it really makes a difference when it comes to meeting them where they're at. Like everybody says that they do, but actually they don't always do that. So some of our programs, right now we have an outreach program. We have some day camps that we're working on, but we're just kind of waiting to see what COVID's going to do for the summer. And then we actually have a powwow club. So once a week, we do cultural activities. It's been on Zoom now because of COVID. It used to be in person. But the goal is to use elders also to reach out to the youth. I think that utilizing elders is very important with Indigenous people. And so it helps to get their viewpoints across. They come along with us on our outreach walks sometimes too. And the young people really enjoy listening to their stories. So.
That's great. If anybody does have questions, please do not hesitate to put them in the chat as well, so we can make sure that we say them. And if you don't know how to use the chat, you can sort of, at a lull, just unmute yourself and ask it out. Something else, Amber, that I was really wondering about, and one of the reasons why I found your own story so powerful, was that often when we talk about the toxic drug crisis and the criminalization of illicit substances in Canada, it seems as though it's an adult problem. But you are seeing it within younger people. And so my question, I guess, for you is, how do we make people aware that younger people are deeply affected by the crisis that surrounds overdose and illicit substances in Canada?
Yeah, it's very true. And actually, because my son was in care of the government, there was an investigation into his death, and it was done by the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate. And they actually did a special report. I can put a link in the comments to it if anybody's interested. It's a special report on opioid deaths within youth that are in care. And there was an extremely high number that year. So they did a special report on it. I'm just trying to think what the original question was. I kind of go off on tangents sometimes.
That's okay. That's okay. That's great to know.
To youth. Yeah. So they are being affected. They're trying things younger and younger. Even if they aren't trying it themselves, they're seeing their parents. We've had a lot of stories of youth finding their parents overdosed and passed away. So it's very sad, and something needs to be done. People don't know that people are trying it that young. I think there was recently a girl in BC that was 12 that overdosed. I don't remember her name, I'm sorry. But it could happen that young. And there's even been, there was a 3-year-old on the reserve a couple weeks ago that got into his parents' medication and passed away. So there's those kinds of stories too.
Rebecca has asked in the chat, how can we support the work of Sweetgrass Youth Alliance?
Well, if you were here, you could volunteer with us because we love having volunteers. And we are not getting very many volunteers because of COVID. So some people are afraid of people that are experiencing homelessness, but we have a website. It's not updated super often. Most of us are not paid employees, so we just do it off the side of our desk of our other job. We have a Facebook page that we monitor and we update quite regularly, so you can share that. Oh, Lorna's here. Hi, Lorna.
I'm on mute. There we go. I saw another question here about when you're doing the Zoom powwow club for a population that often doesn't have access to reliable internet and devices. How is that going? Have you had to negotiate that as a organization? We actually have got a really high number of people that are tuning in, but we find that it's people from all over. So I don't know how they're getting the link or anything, but it's definitely not a lot of the people experiencing homelessness and stuff that are able to come. When we did it in person, we would go and pick people up and we would offer free transportation, and that was working. We do have a tablet that we bring out with us so that we can do like FaceTime visits with family if that's something that they would find out. We could talk about it and bring it out into the open. Obviously, I mean, you don't want to talk about it with an adult, and just developing that relationship and making sure that they're safe. So we hand out a lot of naloxone kits. We hand out we don't hand out safe supplies, but there's another organization called LOPS that does that. So we work with them to hand out safe supply. As long as this hypothetical teenager is aware of different resources, that's probably the best bet. I know it's hard, especially when they're young. Thank you, Amber, and thank you so much for joining us tonight and talking. It was so great. And we have put in the chat, the link to the book, I Am the Opioid Crisis. The website that we put in is the publisher's website, but it's available on many different sites. I think I got mine through Chapters actually, but I think it's available everywhere, like on Amazon and places like that as well. I don't usually advocate for Amazon, but this is a pretty important book. So I will advocate that maybe this one time.
You can actually get it on eaglespeakerpublishing.com too, or eaglespeaker.com straight from the publisher. So
perfect. That's what I will advocate for the most.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Amber.
Thank you for having me.
We're now going to move into a time of actually engaging in some naloxone training. So we're going to watch a video that was given to us by the provincial government of Ontario through the health units. And I'm going to share with you how you can access naloxone in your own province across the country. So you don't have to have a naloxone kit with you, but if you are curious, at least this is what my kit looks like. Some look differently, but this is what a naloxone kit looks like. And the video will show us exactly sort of how somebody moves through utilizing naloxone.
If I recall correctly, I've administered naloxone at least a couple of dozen times.
Yes, I've had it used on myself, the nasal. And when I came to, I was confused and I was embarrassed. I didn't know what was going on. I was sneezing, upset stomach, nausea. But I realized that if they needed to do it to save my life.
folks who use, and those are people who are near and dear to my heart. That's why everyone should carry a naloxone kit, because someone you love is a drug user as well.
It's super important for folks to carry naloxone because naloxone is a life-saving medication. It's an emergency life-saving medication, and it matters how quickly you use it. So if it's on hand and someone overdoses, they can be revived, and it can be a really minimally impactful event. But if it's not there at the scene, if it's not with the person or with somebody nearby, any delay can cause, at the minimum, irreparable brain damage, but at the worst, someone can die. And it's a preventable death.
Naloxone, also known by the brand name Narcan, is a medication that can temporarily reverse an opioid overdose. Naloxone is safe and easy to use. First, let's talk about what opioids are and what an opioid overdose looks like. Opioids include medications prescribed by doctors to treat pain. They might also be taken or used to get high. All opioids carry the risk of sleepiness, drowsiness, and difficulty breathing to the point where people's lives are in danger. Examples of opioids include oxycodone, Percocet, morphine, codeine, heroin, and fentanyl, although there are many more. Opioids can be found in non-opioid street drugs, including uppers like cocaine, due to contamination. If someone purchases heroin, it could be laced with a stronger opioid, such as fentanyl. Using opioids can sometimes lead to an overdose. Signs that a person has overdosed can include: the person's body may be very limp, they can't stay awake, walk, or talk, or they have lost consciousness. They are unresponsive even if you shout or pinch them. They are breathing slowly or not at all. Their fingernails or lips may look purple or blue. They may be making snoring or gurgling sounds. When you look into their eyes, their pupils, the black center of the eye, will be very small, almost pinpoint. Their face may look pale or feel clammy. They may also vomit. There are 5 simple steps to respond to an opioid overdose. Step 1, shout and shake. Step 2, call 911. Step 3, give naloxone. Step 4, rescue breathing and/or chest compressions. Step 5, reassess. The first step is to shout and shake. If you suspect someone has overdosed, check if they respond to noise or touch. Perhaps they're simply sleeping. For noise, shout their name if you know them, or yell, "Hey, are you okay?" You can pinch or shake their shoulders, rub your knuckles up and down on their breastbone or under their nose, or pinch their earlobe. Say what you're going to do before you do it in case they are still conscious. If the person responds to any of these actions, keep an eye on them. Do not leave them alone in case the drugs they took have not fully taken effect. They could still overdose. If the person does not respond to shouting or shaking, check their breathing. See if their chest and stomach are rising and falling, or hold the back of your hand over their mouth or nose to feel their breath. If the person is breathing, put them in the recovery position to keep their airway clear and open, and to prevent choking if they vomit. To place the person in the recovery position, place the arm nearest you at a right angle to their body with the palm facing upwards. Lift their knee to a 90-degree angle and roll them onto their side. When you're finished, the top arm should be supporting the head to keep their airway open, and the bent leg should be on the floor to stop them from rolling over too far. Call 911. Naloxone does not last as long as most opioids, and the person could overdose again. So it is critical to get help so that the person receives continued care. After you call 911, continue to step 3 while you wait for help to arrive. After calling 911, give the person naloxone. Naloxone temporarily reverses the effect of an opioid overdose so that the person can start breathing again. Under Canada's Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act, if you seek medical help for someone who has overdosed, no one at the scene will be charged for possessing or using drugs. There are 2 different types of naloxone. Injectable naloxone, where naloxone is injected into the arm or leg using a needle, or nasal spray naloxone, where naloxone is sprayed into the nose. Both types of naloxone are effective. Carry the type that you are the most comfortable with or have access to. Let's review how to use the nasal naloxone kit. In each kit, you will find 2 doses of nasal spray naloxone inside sealed packages, a pair of non-latex gloves, a breathing barrier, an insert with instructions, and an identifier card showing that you have been trained to carry naloxone and the expiry date of the naloxone. Lay the person on their back and put on your gloves. Wipe their nose clear if necessary, and tilt their head back while supporting their neck. Take one of the naloxone sprays out of the package. Place your 2 fingers on each side of the nozzle and your thumb on the plunger. Do not place your thumb on the plunger until you're ready to administer to avoid releasing naloxone. Place the tip of the nozzle into one of the person's nostrils as far as you can, or until your fingers touch the base of their nose. Press the plunger firmly until the naloxone is released. Naloxone is absorbed through the mucous membrane and can be used even if the person is not breathing. Note the time or set a timer, as another dose may be required. The other type of naloxone is injectable naloxone. In this kit, you will find 2 ampules of naloxone, 2 ampule snappers, 2 syringes, 2 alcohol swabs, a pair of non-latex gloves, a breathing barrier, an instructional insert, and an identifier card. Here's how to use injectable naloxone. Put on your gloves. Holding the ampule upright, swirl or tap it so the liquid falls down into the bottom. Holding the top of the ampule with the supplied ampule snapper or alcohol pads, now take the bottom end with the thumb and forefinger of your opposite hand and snap the ampule away from you. Remove a syringe from its packaging and take the protective plastic cap off the needle. Insert the needle into the naloxone ampule and pull up the plunger so the naloxone enters the syringe. With the needle pointed in the air, tap the syringe so any air bubbles float to the top. Slowly push the plunger to remove the air bubbles. Don't worry, a little bit of air will not hurt the person. Insert the needle at a 90-degree angle into the large muscle of the thigh or upper arm. You can inject someone through their clothing if you need to. Push down on the plunger until all the naloxone is gone. Dispose of the needle and ampule in a plastic, puncture-proof container like a Sharps container or a water bottle. Note the time or set a timer, as another dose may be required. The fourth step is to give chest compressions and/or rescue breaths, depending on what you have been trained to provide. When someone has overdosed on opioids, they may stop breathing and their heart may stop beating. It is important to get oxygen moving in their body. Your naloxone kit includes a breathing barrier that you can use when giving rescue breaths. The fifth step is to check if naloxone is working. Naloxone usually starts working within 2 to 3 minutes. If the person is not responding, administer a second dose. If using the nasal spray, make sure to release the naloxone into the person's other nostril. If you have access to more than one kit, then keep giving naloxone every 2 to 3 minutes if the person still hasn't responded. If you are providing rescue breaths or chest compressions, continue until the person becomes alert or until help arrives. At any point when the person starts breathing again, put them into the recovery position even if they are not fully conscious. Continue to monitor their breathing. Stay with them and keep checking them until they become more conscious and alert or until help arrives. When someone comes out of an overdose, they may wake up suddenly or slowly. They may feel confused, disoriented, agitated, concerned, or embarrassed. Talk with them when they have become more alert. Provide emotional support and reassurance and explain what has happened. They may experience mild to severe withdrawal symptoms. They may feel sick or be sweating. They may also throw up or soil themselves. Explain that these symptoms will go away as the naloxone wears off in 30 to 90 minutes. Explain that taking more drugs to deal with withdrawal symptoms or to get high will be a waste, as the naloxone will block the effects of the drugs. It can also further increase their risk of overdosing again. Monitor and prepare in case they lose consciousness again as the naloxone wears off. Let them know more naloxone may need to be given if that happens. If paramedics were not called, suggest a trip to the hospital for further observation. Responding to an overdose can be challenging, both emotionally and physically. Make sure to check in with a friend or colleague if you need to debrief after. Self-care is important. Carry your naloxone kit with you at all times. Store naloxone at room temperature and away from light. Leave the spray or ampules in the container your kit comes in. Don't leave it in your car on really hot or really cold days. And lastly, check the expiry date from time to time. We hope you found this video helpful. For more information, please contact the public health unit in your region. Get naloxone, get trained, and together we can save lives.
So that's the video for training, and there's a few pieces that in the various trainings that I've conducted that have been brought up that I think are important to share. One piece is that a social worker at one training shared that she would do everything she could with chest compressions, but she never felt comfortable doing the breathing because of what may have been taken in through an ingestible illicit substance. So she really said that with the rise of things like carfentanil and toxic drugs, there was a fear or an issue that it could be that you could ingest if the person happens to start breathing right away and coughs up into your own mouth or something, even with the protector. So her recommendation, and I think it's one to consider, was to focus on the chest compression pieces. And the other piece was to be aware that if you should have to move somebody into the recovery position, just to be aware of what's around their body, if there could be needles or something like that there. So one of the pieces that I did for us tonight was I wanted us to make sure that we knew where throughout the country we can access naloxone. So I'm going to copy and paste into the chat now. It didn't show up with the links. Okay, so I'll figure that out in a second, because those are all supposed to be links to websites where you can get naloxone throughout your country or throughout your province. So in Newfoundland and Labrador, kits are available through Health and Community Services, and they're free to anyone that wants to access them. And you can find on the Newfoundland government website, if you just type in naloxone, that piece should come up for you to find where those community services are available. In Nova Scotia, they're free through select pharmacies. Again, it's nsnaloxone.com to find out what the website is to go on to. In New Brunswick, they're available and free through all pharmacies. In Prince Edward Island, they're available through specific social service organizations. And so you can, on the Prince Edward Island government website, you can access it there. I do see that Carol says if you're not vaccinated against COVID-19, don't do the chest compressions either, as potentially infected water droplets. Thank you, Carol, for sharing that. In Quebec, kits are available through participating organizations and are free as well. Ontario, kits are available through select pharmacies, and the Ontario government website has what pharmacies you can access those kits through. In Manitoba, kits are available through select pharmacies. They are free to people who utilize substances themselves and their family and friends, but they are not free to, if you do not declare that when you go to the pharmacy. In fact, they'll ask you to purchase it. In Saskatchewan, they're free to Indigenous peoples, but they must be purchased by non-Indigenous peoples through the select pharmacies. At least that's what the government's website has said. I'm sure if you had a relationship with a social service organization and you want to access, they will help you find access to a kit, but that is what the government has put out. In Alberta, through select pharmacies, the naloxone kits are free. And in British Columbia, there's select pharmacies and social service organizations where they're free. In Nunavut, if anybody is in Nunavut, you must contact local health services, and they have naloxone kits. Julia said that in Saskatchewan, the Prairie Harm Reduction and possibly others offered kits for free. I figured that they would, so thank you, Julie, for sharing that. In the Northwest Territories, kits are available through pharmacies, but you need a prescription. And they are free, but you need a doctor prescription to get them. And in the Yukon, kits are available through participating organizations, and they're free. So any of your government's websites you can go to, and in the search bar, type in naloxone, and it'll come up with how you can access it. Many of them had maps, that's what these links were supposed to be, of how you can go about accessing naloxone itself. Does anyone have any questions about naloxone as we move into the next part? You can type it into the chat and I will see it. Somebody did ask about the difference between poisoning and overdose. So when somebody says drug poisoning, when somebody says drug overdose. And I'll just share that poisoning is the technically accurate diagnostic term for what's happening in someone's body, where the term overdose actually reflects the administration of the medicine, that it was too large of a dose for someone. So that's sort of where those two words would differ. Poisoning is a technical term, where overdose reflects the amount beyond. Is training available through public health offices? It is, Carol, in certain provinces. Every time you go to a pharmacy, though, they will walk through those steps again with you that are in your kit. They will do a short sort of training similar to what you saw on the video of how to administer the naloxone. So we're going to move into a time now that's a little bit of learning, and it's a bit of a short history. It won't be too long, I promise, of the Government of Canada and the United Church of Canada's relationship with illicit substances for personal use. At the end of this training, we're going to go into breakout rooms to discuss what we've just learned about and what we've talked about. I want to make you aware before even that piece happens that if you don't feel comfortable going into a breakout room, that's perfectly fine. You can stay in the large group here. There'll be a chance for you to say, no, I don't want to go in. But I just want to prepare people that we will be talking in small breakout rooms. So within this introduction to Canada's relationship with illicit substances, it's important to recognize that historically Canada's practices involving substance use has leaned towards a public health-based approach. While the laws in Canada have been enacted, have been punitive in nature. The reality is that historically Canada's drug laws have rarely been based in scientific fact and are often founded on political and moralistic viewpoints with leanings towards both racist and oppressive decision-making. There's a reality that in Canada's laws, they have revealed an uneasy truth about the policy process, which is that drugs and drug users are not a significant social problem until they are socially created to be problematic in their nature. In the decades before drug legislation occurred in Canada, moralistic crusades existed around temperance. And the United Church and its predecessors were actually quite involved in the temperance movement up until about, I think the United Church was still involved up until about the 1950s. So the first federal drug legislation in Canada was in 1908, and it was the Opium Act. At the time, the legislators believed that this was being passed was founded on evidence and consultation with officials, but historical analysis has proven that that actually was not the case. In fact, the act was socially constructed and seemed to have been done so with specific purpose. At the time, the main concerns existed around for Anglo-Saxon colonizers and their desire to maintain dominance in the Canadian life and ensure that their understanding of moral behaviors was implemented for all Canadians. In 1908, the opium was primarily associated with Chinese laborers, and the concern of reformists was that the drugs were being utilized to sexually exploit non-Asian women. At the time, fundamentalists and evangelical Protestant Christians pushed for legislation to criminalize immoral behavior, including opium-related activities. The passage of the 1908 Opium Act was targeted specifically towards the Chinese population in Canada, where opium was utilized in both cultural practice and economic sustainability. The reality was that through widespread lobbying made by Anglo-Saxons allowed for the passage of the bill. At the time, then Deputy Minister of Labour and later Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King shared a 13-page report on the need for suppression in opium trafficking in Canada, appealing to the moralistic panic across the country regarding opium and utilizing stories of young white women as examples why opium needed to be banned across the country. There's been many other drug laws since. I gave you that one as sort of the start of where we were in Canada, and you can see a list here, and each of them dealt with criminalization of substances that were not already criminalized before. And some actually were utilized in advertisements in Canada, such as heroin, for example, for people to utilize at home. And so we see these drug acts, and we also see that they are connected with criminalization specifically. And many of them were focused on a framework to ensure that specific people, mainly racialized people, were criminalized. And we can sort of see that there's a trend across the country when it comes to criminalization for illicit substances, especially in racialized communities. It seems as though the largest percentage in Canada from Ontario to the East Coast are people that are Black and racialized. And then in the prairies, it seems that it's a disproportionate amount of Indigenous people and First Nations people who are racialized. And then when we get to the West Coast, it's actually people of Asian descent who are most highly criminalized when it comes to illicit substances. And so that list just sort of gives us a little bit of a place of recognizing. So there is a war on drugs, and that term has been utilized. It was Richard Nixon who first coined that term. And there are people that are working against it. And I just wanted to share quickly with you the mission of Moms Stop the Harm. Many of you might have heard of Moms Stop the Harm. Some of you may be a part of Moms Stop the Harm. They helped with advertising these three conversations. And Moms Stop the Harm, I'm just going to share what it says as their vision statement. Moms Stop the Harm calls for an end to the failed war on drugs through evidence-based prevention, treatment, and policy change. We support a harm reduction approach that is both compassionate and non-discriminatory for people who use substances. Part of what I was also keenly interested in was the United Church's relationship with illicit substances. And since prohibition actually never occurred across the entire country, except for 1918 to 1920, the sort of relationship with temperance never really took off. But in the 1980s, the United Church of Canada passed 2 resolutions that supported the war on drugs. That also was defining that decade. In the resolutions, one of the pieces that was highlighted was particularly around marijuana and how people perceived it to be the gateway drug. These resolutions, as I said, were passed, adopted by the United Church of Canada as its relationship to illicit substances at the time. And so this brings us to the Good Samaritan Act of today. And I'm just going to quickly sort of share that the Good Samaritan Act was passed on May 4th, 2017 and became law in Canada. And a piece of it is that if you call the police and you are with somebody who does overdose, the Act protects you from charges of possession of a controlled substance, if you should have it there. If you are on probation or conditional sentences or parole for illicit substances, then you are protected against that. It protects anyone that seeks emergency support for somebody that has an overdose in front of them. See that drug addiction is a health issue, not a crime. It's unnecessarily harmed individuals and suppliers and neglected to provide what is calling us to respond to the challenge of the impact of criminalization of drugs for personal use. So they asked the United Church to respond in these 2 ways. That the General Secretary of the United Church of Canada write on behalf of the Generals and the National Drugs for Personal Use. It didn't make it to the that has happened at the regional council level. It's important for us to recognize that since 2018, how much of an issue this has become for the church, for our community, and for our world. And so we know now that people are hungering for the conversation. Right now, there's a bill before the Government of Canada, and this is Bill C-22. And I want to share these principles with you because these principles are extremely important in this bill. The bill right now is a bill that asks the federal government to eliminate the wording around mandatory minimum sentences when somebody is taken into custody with illicit substances. So it's asked to remove that. What it hasn't done, because there's always a piece, is it has left in there that somebody could be charged with life in prison. And it does remove the mandatory minimum sentence. And it also gives these principles that are being asked of the judicial courts when they have somebody come before them who has been charged or could be charged with illicit substance for personal use. And these following principles apply: that problematic substance use should be addressed primarily as a health and social issue. Interventions should be found on evidence-based best practices and should aim to protect the health, dignity, and human rights of individuals who use drugs to reduce harm to those individuals, their families, and their communities. Criminal sanctions imposed in respect to the possession of drugs for personal use can increase the stigma associated with drug use and are not consistent with established public health evidence. Intervention should address the root cause of problematic substance use, including by encouraging measures such as education, treatment, aftercare, rehabilitation, and social integration. And judicial resources are more appropriately used in relation to offenses that possess a risk to public safety. And so one of the pieces that is happening, you may have heard that in British Columbia, Vancouver's City Council voted unanimously to call on the federal government to declare Vancouver a zone of where illicit substances for personal use is not a criminal activity. And we heard, I don't know how many people were on the call before, but there is a motion before, I think it's Calgary or Edmonton, one of those two, the City Council, similar. And I know that there's also one before Toronto City Council. So our cities are asking for themselves to have decriminalization. And I think that is sort of the start of something that's rolling. So we're going to spend about 10 minutes in breakout rooms for conversation. And some of the things that we could sort of get our conversation started with what we heard here was considering past engagements with illicit substances in the Government of Canada's processes and the United Church of Canada's engagement in the war on drugs. Where do you believe the church should engage in harm reduction? How might the church respond to the call for more harm reduction techniques in elimination of stigma? So it's similar to what we asked at the beginning of today, but it goes a little bit deeper. Now that you've learned this, if you didn't know this before, what are some ways that the church could engage? And when we read the principles of Bill C-22, did you see anything that was missing? I'll make sure that while you're in your breakout room, or before you go into the breakout room, I input into the chat those principles so you have them. And is Bill C-22 fulsome enough in helping the court systems encourage a pathway forward that does not include criminalization? So this is just the start of a conversation, and we're going to continue forward. I'm just going to, sorry, I just have to move some stuff on my computer so I can make sure that I can get the, oh, that didn't work. Brianne, if you want to start with breakout rooms, I'm going to stop. Oh, there we go. So people can start joining the breakout rooms, and I will find a way to make sure you get, you will get the principles when you're in your breakout. Oh, Carmen, you have raised your hand.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jeffrey. We had a robust, I think a really good discussion, all too short, and wonderful folks that I was blessed to share a bit of time with. One of the things that I mentioned, and hope not more than just in passing, I happen to have dual citizenship, and one of my citizenships is Portuguese.
Portugal, and Jim has shared about Switzerland. Leslie, I see your hand has raised.
No, I just wanted to share a little anecdote. I was in our local liquor store buying my rye, and I happened to hear the clerk and another customer talking about how awful it was that people wanted to have these safe injection sites. And I missed the opportunity, and I'm kicking myself since, because I thought, where do you think you work? This is a safe ingestion. I know when I go to buy my bottle of rye, what's in it. I don't have to worry about it being contaminated. And that's what I want for people who have, and we know that there are people who have addictions to alcohol. Like people have addictions to other drugs, can we not treat them the same way?
Thank you, Leslie, for saying that. I often hear in the work that a bar is a supervised consumption site. And so thank you for sharing that. Is there anybody else that would like to share anything? You can type it into the chat as well. It's great for me to have a record of this, especially as we're getting closer to another general council.
Yeah.
I will share that. And we know that we have some churches that really want to put forward proposals. It's always helpful to see what people think that the general council and the church itself should be engaged in. So maybe as, oh, somebody, Bill?
Tracy was in our group and she had some really great comments. Tracy, would you share that? Because I think it's really great, your comment.
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So I was just saying how I go to a rather conservative Christian university, and I have these conversations with people all the time that are, let's say, they're more pro-life conservatives. And so for them, doing things like harm reduction, talking about LGBTQ plus communities and stuff like that, but they don't agree with that, right? So for me, I always say to them, well, you know what, if you're gonna be pro-life, then you have to be pro-life for people's entire life, not just as a fetus in a woman's body, or a female identified person's body. You need to be pro-life for everything that comes later in life as well. And that means knowing harm reduction, talking about harm reduction, loving people that are addicted or have mental health issues or are LGBTQ+, even if you don't agree with it, it's our job to love them and to protect them. If that's going to be part of your pro-life stance, you have to do the entire life, not just in utero.
Great, thank you, Tracy, and thank you for sharing that. I do see some comments in the chat that I want to highlight, and Julie has shared that most people in their congregation really struggle with this conversation, especially decriminalization. It's a radical idea for some, and because of how many of us have been taught and cultured in many parts of the world, maybe regions could work together to hold space for intentional and non-judgmental conversations to help unearth what we believe and why, what we fear and why. And I am with you there, Julie. I would be definitely open to engage in those conversations. So we will talk more. And I see a few regional council staff from across the country, including Julie, that maybe we can engage that conversation more so, because I would love to see that happen. I see that Linda's question was answered. Linda, it was a proposal that went to the 2018 General Council, and that the resolution that was made at the executive was how that proposal was dealt. Local congregations is a very important place to start. Dave, you brought up an important point that sometimes for people, statistics, which proves that harm reduction works when faced with an argument, helps them sort of see that. And so statistics matter as much as personal stories do matter. For some people, statistics are a big piece of that. And so I was actually thinking a little bit about that, how we can engage going further. And somebody in last week's chat actually brought up Benjamin Perrin, who wrote the book Overdose, Heartbreak and Hope in Canada's Opioid Crisis. And actually last fall, when we were having our some conversations specifically in Barrie, Ontario area, but it was within our region, there were people from across the region, we had Ben come and speak to the group. And Ben was very willing, I'm just going to get the link here. Ben was very willing for us to share that conversation publicly. So you can go to Shining Waters Regional Council's YouTube page and actually watch that conversation, but there is the link to the conversation as well. Ben shares some very strong words. And for people that maybe don't know Ben's story, Ben was the chief legal counsel for Prime Minister Stephen Harper from 2012 to 2013. Ben is a Christian, and his call to harm reduction came through his Christian faith. And so it's quite an interesting conversation. He shares a great deal. I also recommend, if this is something new that's to you and engaging in the conversation, Ben's book is a great introduction to the conversation and is filled with a lot of information and details, but it's extremely accessible. And that to me is extremely important. It's a good book to sort of start with your reading. So it's called Overdose, and Ben does talk about the book in the conversation. I also want to share with you that there we are. There is another conversation on Shining Waters Regional Council's website with the founders of Fentagon. And next week, the 3 founders of Fentagon will actually be with us. So this is a little bit of a precursor if you're interested to figure out what Fentagon is before. This video just went up today. So I encourage you to check that out, but we will also hear from them as well next week. And so speaking of next week, we have our panel. It's similar to last week. You won't hear me talk as much, so that's kind of a great thing, I think, for everybody. But our presenters next week will be Reverend Barry Morris, who's out in Vancouver, Reverend Michiko Brown-Kai, who is in Cambridge, Ontario, Reverend Philip Cable, who is up in Barrie, Ontario, and each have worked in harm reduction in some capacity, and they will be focusing on what a theology of harm reduction is. We'll also hear from Ardish, Simran, and AJ, who founded Fentagon, and we'll hear more about their call to harm reduction through the prototype that they've created, where a syringe that can detect overdosable levels of fentanyl in it. And so that begins next week at 7:30 or 7 o'clock Eastern time, and then different times in your own time zone, and goes till 8:30. So before we close, I just want to again thank the Church and Mission Unit, Shining Waters Regional Council, Living Skies Regional Council, Antler River Watershed Regional Council, Northern Spirit Regional Council, Western Ontario Waterways Regional Council, Horseshoe Falls Regional Council, and Prairie du Pine Regional Council for all being part of sponsors of tonight's evening. And so as we go about our way in the world, we leave this time in prayer together. We go as people recognizing that we are a community called into action by you, O God.
Because it sounded like they were going on.
We go as people desiring to be in relationship. We go in the hope of change. We go in the hope of connection. We go in the hope that resurrection provides us with. We go seeking justice, for we go in Christ. Amen. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next week.